Hey guys, alright? Welcome everyone. The story begins with a group of Vikings gathered on the shores of a dark lake. The king brought the warriors there to please the god Odin, but his daughter Asa doesn't think it's right and says her father's greed will ruin their people. Ignoring the princess's advice, he orders them to proceed with the task. His men place a sheep on a small raft and push the bait to the center of the lake. As the raft drifts away, the sheep disappears under a dense fog, and the king steps forward for a better view. Suddenly, the princess screams and points to the lake, where something rises right in front of the king with a threatening roar. After that, all that can be heard are the desperate screams of the rest of the group. We then move to modern-day Norway, where we meet Sigurd Svensson. He is an archaeologist who became a widower 5 years ago and now takes care of his children, Ragnhild and Brage, on his own. Today is their last day of school, and Sigurd almost forgot that Ragnhild is going to sing at a school event. Coincidentally, Sigurd has to face an audience today as well. The museum investors are sitting in front of the famous Oseberg ship, where the remains of Queen Asa were found. Sigurd's research indicates that the Oseberg's voyages were much longer than previously believed. He found a specific type of seashell stuck to the hull of the ship, which only exists in the Finnmark region in the north of the country. The discovery represents a major turnaround in what is known about the Vikings, but it would only have value if there were concrete proof, and the investors aren't very impressed with a handful of shells. Noticing the general disappointment, Sigurd decides to disobey his boss and reveal his true theory even without having confirmed it yet. He shows that several Viking artifacts were found on the ship, and the most fascinating are the sculptures of animal heads. The one that was in the queen's arms represents a serpent whose body is adorned with an irregular pattern. Sigurd and his late wife, Maren, concluded that it is an inscription in runes, spelling out the word Ragnarok. In Norse mythology, this word indicates the end of times, but now Sigurd thinks it may have been a real historical event. The investors begin to mock these ridiculous ideas and warn that they are pulling their support for the museum from now on. Furious, Sigurd's boss suggests he quit his research and work as a tour guide instead. He is so shaken that he loses track of time flipping through Maren's notebook and ends up being late. The event for Ragnhild has already finished when he arrives at the school, and she is very upset with her father. At night, Brage tries to help and says it's normal for a single dad to get overwhelmed with daily life. Sigurd then confirms his suspicions about the emails he has been receiving from lonely ladies. The boy is trying to find a girlfriend for him online, without paying much attention to the candidates' ages. Still angry, Ragnhild asks what their summer vacation trip will be. Her friends are going to Spain, and Brage wants to dive, but neither of them knows that Sigurd is practically unemployed. He suggests a visit to the family cabin in the countryside, which infuriates the girl. Later, Sigurd receives a visit from his colleague Alan, who is equally passionate about the Vikings. He is responsible for the more practical side of the research and has just returned from Finnmark with good news. Sigurd tells him what happened at the museum and explains that the research is likely over, but the young man says none of that matters compared to what he found in the north. He pulls out what looks like just a stone from his backpack, but Sigurd sees that it is covered in runes. After cleaning the surface, he realizes that the message is written in an unknown code, but the symbol at the center of the stone is very familiar. Taking advantage of the fact that Sigurd still has the museum key, the two go there in the middle of the night and take an Oseberg relic that has the same shape as the symbol. Using that object, Sigurd is able to decipher most of the text and is astonished to understand its historical value. Queen Asa commissioned that stone to be raised in memory of her father, who arrogantly challenged the gods. The message mentions a bottomless lake called Odin's Eye, and says that the stone marks the start of a 3-day march to get there. Sigurd and Alan shiver at the realization that it is almost a map. Ragnhild isn't very happy though, since now the family trip will be to Finnmark, a completely boring destination. She says this will cost a new computer, and Sigurd agrees to the deal without problems. When they arrive, Alan introduces his assistant, a very skilled woman named Elizabeth. Talking to her, Alan shows great enthusiasm for the expedition since his guess is that the map leads to a treasure that the Vikings hid. That's why he even hired a guide, an unfriendly old man named Leif. Then the journey begins, and even the kids get excited riding in the boat. But when they reach the top of the hill, Ragnhild gets irritated again seeing that her phone has no signal. Another difficulty is that the coordinates were written over 1,000 years ago, and many changes have occurred since then. Arriving at a fence full of unfriendly signs, Leif explains that this is the old border between Norway and the Soviet Union. The region is filled with remnants of the war and is completely abandoned. Leif asks if they really want to continue, and Alan just takes the pliers from his hand, already opening a passage through the fence. Surprised by such courage, Leif asks what they are looking for, but Alan prefers to dodge the question. Elizabeth laughs when she sees that Ragnhild doesn't know how to put on insect repellent. She asks where her mother is, and the girl replies that she died of cancer years ago. After passing through abandoned vehicles and all sorts of trash, the group arrives at a large lake with a small island in the center. Leif asserts that this is the only one for several kilometers, and Sigurd says it has to be Odin's eye. They then cross the lake on a raft and begin to search the islet with metal detectors, but all they find are traces of modern wars. Sigurd sees that Leif is flipping through Marin's notebook without his permission and demands that he return it. The atmosphere becomes a bit tense between the two, and Sigurd gives up on talking, simply taking the notebook back. Bored, the children start to explore the island on their own. Ragnhild hears something bubbling in the lake but doesn't see anything strange and continues walking until she finds a kind of military bunker. Brage is more interested in the natural formations and ends up going into a dark cave. Inside the bunker, the furniture and objects are very dusty, and it is evident that no one has been there for decades. Ragnhild gets startled when Leif appears in the doorway. He is searching for valuable items or those that can be sold as antiques, including a firearm. Still very disappointed, Sigurd tries to find answers in the notebook, and Elizabeth sees that he keeps several pictures of his wife. She tries to talk about it, encouraging Sigurd to open up, but it is then that he hears his son's screams. Fortunately, Brage is not in danger. He just wants to show his father that he found a huge cave. Shining the flashlight to the back, Sigurd realizes that this could be the place they are looking for. He alerts the others, and soon Alan is climbing down with Leif too. Alan is impressed and says that the cave extends almost all over the island. When it is Sigurd's turn to climb down, Elizabeth notices that he is not much of a thrill seeker and helps him adjust the equipment. Ragnhild can't help but smile when she notices that the two are flirting. Lastly, Elizabeth goes down with the kids, and they all start exploring the cave. It isn't long before Alan finds a Viking helmet. He and Sigurd are thrilled with the discovery since this object proves the theory that Osberg was indeed in the north. With just this one helmet, Sigurd's job is not only guaranteed but he could even become famous. Elizabeth is also excited and says there could be many more relics around. She encourages the kids to look too, and each one goes off to analyze the muddy ground with their flashlights. Brage finds a kind of oval stone and calls his father again, but Sigurd is already too busy cataloging dozens of other artifacts. Then the boy puts the thing into his backpack and soon forgets about it. Leif is increasingly curious about the expedition and even tries to grab another oval stone but ends up giving up and gets his boots all gooey. When Alan and Sigurd begin to debate the best way to transport everything to the museum, Leif interrupts the conversation in an indignant tone. He can't believe that those two have found so many valuable things and plan to give everything away for free to a museum. This comment is the last straw for Sigurd, who can no longer stand the guide's behavior. He responds rudely that all of it will go to the museum because it doesn't belong to either of them. Not accepting this, Leif points the shotgun at the others and robs absolutely everything they found. Then he climbs the cave wall alone and drops the rope, leaving the entire group down below. The adults lament the priceless loss, and Ragnhild gets frightened when she stumbles upon a skull. On the raft, Leif is trying to clean the goo when he notices some strange bubbles on the surface. We see that there is something at the bottom of the lake, and the thing observes him for a few moments before attacking the raft from below. Meanwhile, Elizabeth manages to climb the side of the cave even without the equipment and then helps the others up too. As it is getting dark, they decide to spend the night on the islet and build a new raft the next day. The kids settle in one of the bunkers with Elizabeth, while the two adults make a campfire. Sigurd remains puzzled by Odin's eye. The artifacts that Leif stole would have made a big difference for his career, but they weren't that important to the Vikings. It doesn't make sense that they traveled all the way there just to hide those things. While he speaks, Alan examines the skull that Ragnhild found and accidentally causes a crack. This reveals a huge fang that was embedded in the back of that skull. Fascinated by the discovery, the two decide to return to the cave. A little after that, Brage's backpack begins to move on its own until it topples over. That oval stone rolls across the floor and begins to crack. A few minutes later, Brage wakes up to strange sounds coming from inside the bunker. Seeing the broken shell, the boy realizes that it was an egg and consequently, a hatchling is now loose. Ragnhild also wakes up, and the two begin to panic as the creature makes a mess without revealing itself. They try to call for Elizabeth, but she is a very heavy sleeper. When the hatchling reveals itself, we see it is a type of serpent. Brage is almost losing his fear and decides to offer food. However, this opens the animal's appetite, and it lunges toward the boy. Elizabeth wakes up to the children's screams and manages to trap the hatchling in a metal box. In the cave, Alan and Sigurd arrive at a chamber full of skeletons. Comparing the drawings in the notebook with the tooth that Alan took from the skull, they start to form a new theory. Perhaps Ragnarok is a creature, and not an event. After all, the word was written right on the serpent statue. The two begin to get excited about the idea of finding traces of an unknown species. Many animals go extinct every day, and it wouldn't be impossible for one of those ancient monsters to have actually existed. But then Sigurd finds the remains of a Soviet soldier who appears to have died in the same way as the Vikings, even though he only arrived there 1,000 years later. The enthusiasm of the duo starts to turn into fear upon realizing that they might find something that isn't exactly a fossil. Curiosity prevails for a few more steps until something begins to roar from the back of the den, confirming that fear. The two hide quickly, and Sigurd can only see parts of a gigantic scaly body. At the same time, Elizabeth is keeping an eye on the box that won't stop moving. Moreover, the hatchling emits an increasingly loud sound. Outside the bunker, there is a reel with a rope that is extended to the lake. Suddenly, something pulls the rope tight, and the whole bunker begins to be dragged toward the water, knocking over everything in its path. The children scream, and Elizabeth tells them to hold on to something. When they are about to fall into the lake, the bunker gets caught in the trees and gets stuck. This gives enough time for Alan and Sigurd to arrive to help, but the trees are already beginning to give under the weight of the structure. The two manage to open the door, and Elizabeth comes out with Ragnhild. Then the bunker slides a bit further, and Brage loses his balance, sliding even deeper inside. Sigurd leans in and grabs the bag that the boy is holding. When the bunker finally falls into the lake, he manages to pull Brage to him and saves his son. Unfortunately, this does not mean the danger has passed, as they are still trapped on the island with a monster in the water. Additionally, Sigurd still doesn't know that the bag on his shoulder contains a box with a monster hatchling. Brage asks Elizabeth if the creature could walk on land, and she replies that she doesn't know, but nobody wants to be stuck there for another day. The adults then search the rest of the island for something useful for their escape. Noticing the box that is moving on its own, Alan decides to sneak a peek inside. Upon seeing the hatchling serpent, his sense of opportunity overshadows his survival instincts, and he decides to take that trophy. With the collected materials, Elizabeth manages to set up an improvised zipline to reach the other side. Now all that is left is the courage to cross the lake this way, knowing what lies beneath. Alan goes first, and the kids follow closely, reaching the shore without incident. However, Sigurd does not have the same luck. Right in the middle of the crossing, the pulley gets stuck, and he hangs there. Elizabeth tries to adjust the rope but only worsens the situation. Sigurd drops another 2 meters, now very close to the water, and is held only by a poorly attached hook. Elizabeth goes to the middle to fix the pulley, and then Sigurd realizes that the creature is coming. The children start to scream, and he holds onto Elizabeth's hand, who lifts him up to the level of the rope. The two hang there, waiting, while bubbles multiply right below them. At that moment, the serpent's gigantic head surfaces from the water to strike. It misses the bite, but the scare makes its victims drop the rope. Sigurd and Elizabeth fall into the water and begin to swim frantically toward the shore. Alan shoots the serpent with a flare and manages to delay its advance, giving the friends time to escape. Relieved, the two join the group, and they all begin the walk toward the border. Sigurd hears the noise of the hatchling, but doesn't know what it is or where it is coming from. Alan continues to hide the box in his backpack even after everything, hoping to gain fame and wealth. As a consequence of this, Bragg's question is finally answered. When the trees behind the group start to fall, they discover that the serpent can indeed stay out of the water. In a panic, they run to a military shelter and quickly lock the door. The serpent arrives just a few seconds later and begins to ram against the door with incredible force. When Alan manages to turn the lights on, we see that the shelter is quite vast and filled with corridors. The group splits up, trying to find another exit before the creature breaks down the door. But then the generator falters, and the light goes out again. Ragnhild begins to cry and fights with her father, saying it is all his fault. After she calms down, the girl starts reading her mother's notes in the notebook and asks what is written in another language. As Sigurd explains to her about Asa, he himself starts to fill in the gaps in the story. On that night over 1,000 years ago, the king came to Odin's eye to defeat the legendary creature. His obsession cost many lives, including his own. Sigurd finally understands that the stone was not a map but a warning. The parallel between the families also becomes evident. Just like Princess Asa, Ragnhild didn't want to come there, but couldn't overcome her father's obsession. Looking up, Sigurd sees the ventilation tubes and tells Elizabeth that they must lead to the exit. He and Alan light torches to illuminate the way, and the group follows the tubes until they find an opening in the ceiling. Alan climbs a shelf to reach the hatch and, with great effort, manages to open it. As soon as Sigurd helps him up, the hatchling begins to grunt and thrash about. Seeing his secret in jeopardy, Alan asks Sigurd to hand him the backpack quickly, but his friend prefers to check what is inside the box. With a disappointed expression, Sigurd tries to explain that capturing the hatchling is a terrible idea. But Alan starts to become aggressive and says that no one will laugh at his research anymore when he displays the specimen. He is so nervous that he doesn't even notice the danger behind him. Sigurd hands the backpack to him at the exact moment the beast arrives. From inside the shelter, they only hear the roar as Alan is pulled away, dropping the backpack. Then the serpent appears and lunges at the hatch with such force that the shelter's ceiling begins to collapse. The children manage to run and escape the destruction but end up getting separated. Sigurd and Elizabeth are hit and lose consciousness. Brage gets scared and starts calling for his father until someone grabs him and covers his mouth. Fortunately, it's his sister, fearing that the boy's voice will attract the beast. Hidden in a closet, they peek through the cracks when the serpent arrives, trying to sniff out her offspring. After it leaves, they try to sneak out without knowing that the creature is lurking very close to them. Terrified, the siblings flee through the corridors while the serpent pursues them, devastating everything in its path. The mix of roars and screams causes Sigurd to begin waking up. His children are cornered by the monster when he regains full consciousness. Seeing the backpack right next to him, Sigurd knows exactly what to do. He goes up to the serpent and opens the box, offering a trade. The hatchling climbs up its mother's head, appearing tiny in comparison, and the serpent simply withdraws, satisfied with the deal. After apologizing to the children, Sigurd finds Elizabeth unconscious. They worry for a moment, but she soon opens her eyes and says she's fine. Far from the dreaded lake, the children embrace their father, and Elizabeth joins them, as if she is already becoming part of the family.